the rich man, dressed in the finest of clothes. He wore purple and fine linen. He rode in the best of cars, or probably chariots, gold-lined. Had the 14-stall garage, swimming pool out back. He had it all. He enjoyed the great luxuries of life. He had the friends to go with it. Anything his heart desired was his. He ate the very best of foods imported from regions all around the world. And outside the gate of one of his homes sat a beggar. His name was Lazarus. And Lazarus longed to eat just some of the crumbs that came from the table of the rich man, fell on the floor. But nothing was ever given to him. No one could be bothered. And as so often happens with the poor, Lazarus developed chronic sickness, sores, disease, lack of nutrition, lack of health care, back-breaking work takes its wear on a body. He developed sickness and disease, and he laid there outside that gate, suffering. No one cared for him. No one bothered to bandage his wounds. Nobody brought him any scraps. He laid there. It says the dogs would even sometimes come and they would lick his wounds. Sometimes it was the only relief he got, and other times it was agonizing torture. As this happens to all of us, at one point, Lazarus dies. No one bothers to care for him. No one takes the time to bury him. So we are told the angels came. The only ones who noticed it. Carried him to the side of Abraham. In time, so too did the rich man. He died. They put on an amazing funeral. This gold-clad coffin. People came from all around the world to celebrate him. They line the streets. It says they buried him in the ground. In hell. They placed him. And he writhed and he suffered and he agonized in that place. At some point, he looks up in his agony. He looks and he crosses this chasm of space and he sees Abraham and he sees Lazarus, the beggar who was outside his gate by his side. And he pleads and he begs for Abraham to send Lazarus to take and dip just his finger in the water to touch his tongue. Maybe you'll kind of experience that kind of thirst. I'm sure, Phyllis, in all your days in nursing, you've seen it many times. You go in for surgery at 6 o'clock in the morning and they tell you you can't have anything to eat or drink, and then the surgery gets delayed until 6 o'clock that evening, and they're just suffering of thirst, and then they get the surgery and there's a complication, and now you're into the afternoon the next day, and they're just agonizing for one of those pink sponges. I've seen that look on the face several times where they just, that little tiny bit of water on the tongue and that incredible relief that comes on the person's face. Lazarus is pleading. The rich man is pleading for Lazarus to just dip his finger. So desperate, this finger that was, apparently I'm running a race right now. That is the honest thing. Okay, sorry. To dip his finger in water. This finger that maybe once had sores on it, to give him some relief. But Abraham says nothing can be done. There is a chasm that separates them. And even if they wanted to eat, there is no possibility that they could go between it. Nobody from the side that he is on could come over, and nobody from Lazarus could not possibly come to. There's nothing they can do. And so he pleads again with Abraham. Well, if you cannot send anybody to me, if there's no relief, could you at least send Lazarus to my family? Warn them. Change their ways. Do not live the way I did. Do something. And Abraham says, no, nothing can be done. Besides, after all, they have Moses and the prophets. They have the law and the prophets. They have everything they need. They know how they're to live. They know of God's preference for the poor. But Abraham says, or the poor man, I'll get there eventually. The rich man says, well, no. If somebody will rise from the dead and come to them, then they'll believe. Then they'll listen. If Lazarus will rise from the dead, Abraham says, even if somebody rises from the dead, they will not believe. After all, they have the law and the prophets. Jesus tells this story to a group of Pharisees. Luke has set the stage in Luke chapter 16. He begins this section by saying, speaking of the Pharisees, and he describes them as those who loved money. And they sneered at Jesus. So Jesus tells a story. Now, a slight side to this story. It's a parable. Jesus is not describing what the afterlife is like. He has set a stage to make a point. But he tells a story to the Pharisees, and they are there. But they're not the only ones who are there. And it's important for us to see as we look at this, that while Jesus is speaking in this moment to the Pharisees, his disciples are over here as well, listening in and hearing this story. And after he's told this story to the Pharisees, he turns to his disciples and he speaks to them, but the Pharisees are still there, hearing what Jesus is saying. And Jesus says to his disciples, things that cause people to stumble are bound to come, but woe to anyone whom they come. It would be better for them to be thrown into the sea with a millstone tied around their neck than to cause one of these little ones to stumble. So watch yourselves. Jesus is not speaking strictly about children here. He's speaking about the young in faith. There's a third group that's also listening in on this whole scene, and that is the crowds. And there is this warning that Jesus is giving to his disciples to not lead these crowds astray. At one point, Jesus will describe them as like sheep without a shepherd. Do not lead these people astray. Do not cause them to stumble. You who have the law and the prophets, he sort of speaks to the Pharisees. You who know the right way to go, do not cause others to stumble in the way that you live. And he goes on and he says, if a brother or sister sins against you, rebuke them. If they repent, forgive them. I mean, if they sin against you 7 times in a day and 7 times come back to you saying, I repent, you must forgive them. Jesus sits between the disciples and the Pharisees. Disciples, these Pharisees over here who have sneered at you and who love money, forgive them. Even if they come 7 times in a day and ask you forgiveness, forgive them. Pharisees, these disciples over here, these ones who mock you, forgive them. Do not cause little ones to stumble because of your unwillingness to forgive each other. And in a rare moment, the disciples feel the weight of what Jesus has placed upon them. The weight of the responsibility that is on them. The weight of causing those to stumble and the impossibility of forgiving. So often when the disciples it seems when they are confronted, particularly Peter, they have a way of saying crazy things. The Spirit of God surrounds them and Peter says, let's build a house. Jesus, can we call down fire on them? But in this moment, they don't go anywhere. They say, increase our faith. Feel the weight of what is on them. Another time, they would say to Jesus, teach us to pray. They would see Jesus praying, and they would ask, teach us to pray. He would give them what we today call the Lord's Prayer. This time, last week it's the microphone, this week it's the watch. This time they say, give us, increase our faith. A father would bring his son to Jesus, pleading for Jesus to heal him. If you are able, he says to Jesus. Jesus says, if I'm able. The father says, I believe, but help my unbelief. There's a sense of the disciples saying much the same thing. We recognize we have some faith. We recognize you have taught us something, but we do not have the faith to do what you have placed on us. We do not have the faith to forgive. We do not have the faith to carry this weight that you have put on us of not causing others to stumble. Increase our faith. And Jesus tells them a story. If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to a mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea, and it will obey you. It's an absurd thing, isn't it? If you have even the smallest of faith, the impossible can happen. A mulberry tree can be pulled up from the ground and be planted in the sea. This is not hydroponics. It's absurd that you would plant a tree in the sea. But you can do the impossible. And see the impossible, even with the smallest of faith. Of course, that still leaves the question, well, where is the source of this faith? Jesus has not missed this question because he goes on. He says, suppose one of you has a servant who is plowing and looking after the sheep, plowing the ground, looking after the sheep. He spent his day in the field, tending the fields, planting the seeds. He's cared for the sheep and the flock. He comes in from this day's labor. He says, will the master say to his servant, come sit down and have a meal with me? He says, of course not. Say, go fix my food. So the servant goes, prepares the food, and then once the meal has been set, and the master has eaten in the house, then the servant will be allowed to eat and to drink when the day's work is done. And Jesus asks, will he thank the servant because he did what he was told to do? The obvious answer is no. So you also, when you have done everything you were told to do, should say, we are unworthy servants. We have only done our duty. The source of faith is found in obedience. Obedience in the ordinary, in the routine. The source of faith is found in obedience to the law and the prophets. We're often looking for the big and the dramatic in our faith. We're looking for the person to rise from the dead. We say, if we would see that, then we'd believe. Or if we would come and we would gather in a worship service and we'd have an emotional experience and the songs would just be right. Then we'll believe. When everything feels right. The source of faith is found in obedience, in the ordinary, not in the large and the dramatic. We are called to be obedient. And when we do so, we do not expect to receive great reward, to enjoy all the riches of life, of prosperity, to have built our kingdoms ourselves. Instead, we recognize we are unworthy servants, ones who have done only what we have been commanded to do. And we live in humility. We have simply done our duty. We have followed the law and the prophets. We have followed the way of Jesus. Jesus says, if you love me, you will obey what I command. You will live out the ordinary obedience source